The forests of the Wild West were not only home to wolves, bears, and shadows that stretched like claws across the earth. They also carried secrets that could change a boy's life forever. On one such night, beneath the whisper of the pines and the flicker of the moon, a young boy stumbled upon something no settler expected to find. A native girl, lost, trembling, and alone. She was frightened, her eyes wide with the weight of a danger unspoken. And though he was just a child himself, he felt the pull of duty that men twice his age might have ignored. What began as a simple act of kindness, leading her through the dark, sharing his bread, giving her warmth, would soon unravel into a story that neither he nor his family could ever forget. The West was a land divided by suspicion and silence, where encounters between settlers and natives often ended in fear or blood. Yet this moment defied that cruel rhythm. The boy did not see an enemy in the girl, nor did she see a threat in him. In the hush of the forest, stripped of pride, borders, and the weight of history, they were simply two lost souls bound by need. The courage to reach across that invisible line was not born of strength, but of innocence. And it was precisely that innocence that would soon summon forces greater than either could understand. When dawn broke, the boy believed the night's encounter would fade like a dream. He returned home quietly, his heart heavy but his conscience clear. The world, however, had taken note. For in a land where every gesture carried meaning, where every act could ignite peace or war, his choice to help a lost child was no small thing. It was a spark, and sparks on the dry plains of the frontier could burn brighter than fire. The next day, just as the sun dipped behind the horizon and painted the earth in shades of blood and gold, a single knock echoed on the wooden door of the boy's home. It was not the hollow rap of a stranger passing through, nor the frantic pounding of a traveler in need. It was slow, deliberate, and heavy, as though each strike carried the weight of history itself. When the boy's father opened the door, what stood there was not a settler, not a neighbor, but a chief, alone, tall, proud, and silent, his presence filling the doorway like a storm waiting to break. And in that silence, a question hung heavier than the evening air. What had the boy truly done by leading the girl home? Was it salvation, or had he unknowingly invited a reckoning that would test the strength of his family, his town, and perhaps even the fragile peace of the West itself? The chief's arrival shook the household to its core. He stood tall in the doorway, his expression carved from years of battles and burdens, yet his eyes carried something deeper, something the boy could not quite name. Silence stretched between them, heavier than words, until the boy's mother stepped forward with trembling hands, offering the chief a seat by the fire. He did not speak at first, only watched the boy with a gaze that pierced through flesh and bone, as though weighing the measure of his heart. In that moment, the boy realized the forest had not forgotten his act of kindness, nor had the people to whom the girl belonged. As the fire cracked and the family shifted uneasily, the chief finally spoke. His voice was steady, low, and measured, carrying the weight of centuries. He spoke of the girl, his granddaughter, who had wandered too far and lost her way in the forest's twisting paths. He told of the fear that had gripped his people when she did not return, of the long night they spent searching beneath the watch of the moon. And then, with a slow breath, he revealed that the boy's kindness had carried her safely back to where they would find her at dawn. Without his help, she might have vanished into the shadows forever. The boy's father straightened at those words, torn between pride and caution. In the West, alliances were fragile, and trust was rare. What might have seemed like a child's simple kindness had now become a thread pulling at the fabric of two worlds long set apart. The chief's gratitude was clear, yet behind his words there lingered another meaning, a recognition that this single act could not be left unacknowledged. Something more would come of it, something the family could neither predict nor prevent. The boy sat quietly, his small hands clenched in his lap, his heart pounding with equal parts fear and wonder. He had not thought of his choice as brave, only necessary. Yet now, under the gaze of a man who had led warriors and seen countless seasons of struggle, it felt different. It felt as though he had stepped into a story much larger than himself, one that stretched beyond his home, his town, and perhaps even the West itself. When the chief finally rose, he placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. His touch was firm but not harsh, carrying with it a silent promise. He did not explain further, nor did he need to. For in the boy's heart, the message was clear. The forest had tested him, and he had been found worthy. But worthiness, in a land like this, often came at a price. The following days carried an unease that spread like wildfire through the small town. Word of the chief's visit traveled faster than the wind, and soon every neighbor, rancher, and saloon-goer spoke of it in hushed tones. Some praised the boy for his courage, calling him a bridge between two worlds. Others feared the consequences, whispering that no good could come from inviting the attention of men who lived by different laws and carried the weight of 1,000 untold grievances. In the Wild West, gratitude could turn to reckoning in the span of a heartbeat. The boy's family felt the weight of those whispers. His father sharpened his tools with more force than before, his eyes scanning the horizon as though expecting riders at any moment. His mother prayed in silence, clutching her Bible until her knuckles turned white. And the boy himself, though he tried to continue his days as before, could not escape the feeling that something unseen had begun to follow him. He would catch glimpses of shadows at the edge of the fields, movements in the forest, as if eyes watched from beyond the tree-line. Then, one evening, as the sun sank low and the world turned golden with dust and fading light, the boy saw her again, the native girl he had led through the forest. She stood at the edge of the yard, her figure half-hidden, her eyes wide with the same fear he remembered from that night. But this time, there was something else in her gaze, recognition, and perhaps even trust. She did not step closer, nor did she speak, but her presence alone was enough to send a chill through him. He knew she had come for a reason, though what it was remained hidden in silence. That night, the boy's dreams twisted with visions. He saw the forest alive with fire, the ground trembling beneath pounding hooves, and the chief's face staring at him not with gratitude, but with sorrow. He woke drenched in sweat, the echo of drums still pounding in his ears. Outside, the night was still, but he could not shake the feeling that the dream had not been his own. It was as though the land itself had whispered into his sleep, warning him of a storm yet to come. The days that followed only deepened the mystery. The chief had not returned, yet his absence felt louder than his presence. The boy's family carried on their work, but the air in the house grew heavier with each passing sunset. And all the while, the boy could not shake the thought that the story had only begun, that a single act of kindness had set into motion something that neither he nor anyone else could control. The town soon began to split in two. Half of the settlers believed the boy's act of kindness was a blessing, a rare sign that peace might be possible between their world and the natives. The other half, hardened by years of raids and loss, whispered that trouble was coming, that no good ever followed when the lines of trust were crossed. In the saloon, voices rose in arguments until fists slammed tables and bottles shattered. And through it all, the boy sat in silence, carrying the weight of a choice he had never imagined would ripple so far. One evening, as dusk bled into night, the boy's father returned from town with a face lined in worry. He said men had spoken of gathering rifles, preparing for the worst. Rumors spread that the chief's visit had not been one of thanks, but of warning, that soon others would come to claim what the boy had unknowingly promised. The boy listened quietly, his heart pounding. He had not promised anything, not in words, and yet deep inside, he felt as though the forest had bound him to something greater than his own understanding. That night, the boy wandered to the edge of the woods, drawn by a pull he could neither fight nor explain. The forest greeted him with silence, the kind that swallowed even the sound of his breath. And then he saw her again, the native girl, watching him from between the trees. She stepped forward slowly, her eyes filled with something that looked like sorrow. For a moment, neither spoke. Then, with a trembling voice, she whispered that her grandfather, the chief, believed the boy had been chosen. Chosen for what? She would not say, only that the forest would reveal it in time. The boy returned home shaken, carrying more questions than answers. His father grew angry when he spoke of the girl, warning him never to wander near the woods again. His mother prayed louder that night, her voice breaking as she begged for protection over her child. But the boy could not silence the words he had heard. Chosen. The sound of it lingered like a seed planted deep in his heart, a seed that grew heavier with every beat of the drum he swore he could hear in the distance when the night grew still. By morning, the forest looked unchanged. The town carried on as always, and the boy's chores remained the same. But within him, something had shifted. He was no longer just a child who had helped a girl home. He was now a part of a story that stretched far beyond his years, a thread woven into a fabric older than the town, older than the West itself. And though he could not yet see its shape, he knew with certainty that whatever was coming, it would begin with him. The days grew hotter, the air thick with tension as the town braced for what it could not name. Men gathered near the saloon, oiling their rifles, sharpening their blades, and telling stories of raids past. Women whispered in corners, holding their children closer, their eyes darting toward the forest that loomed like a wall at the edge of their lives. And all the while, the boy felt the weight of their fear pressing against his small shoulders, as though the entire town, now, carried his choice like a burden they had not agreed to bear. The chief did not return, but his presence was felt in every shadow. Travelers spoke of seeing him alone on the ridges, watching the town from afar, his figure silhouetted against the sunset. Some said he was waiting, measuring the settlers' strength, deciding if peace or war would follow. Others believed he was testing the boy, seeing if he would remain true to the path that had been set before him. Whatever the reason, his silence became a drumbeat of dread that no one could escape. One evening, the boy found himself drawn again to the forest's edge. This time, the native girl stepped closer than before, her small hand clutching a piece of woven cloth, marked with symbols he did not understand. She pressed it into his palm and told him it was a sign of protection, a gift from her people. He asked her why, his voice breaking with fear, but she only shook her head and whispered that soon he would need it. Her eyes, filled with both sadness and certainty, told him everything his young heart feared. The storm was coming. When he returned home with the cloth, his father's anger burned hotter than ever. He tore the fabric from his son's hand and threw it into the fire, declaring that no good could come from mingling with those who lived by other laws. The boy watched as the flames devoured it, the smoke curling upward like a spirit torn from the earth. But in his chest, he felt a hollow ache, as though something precious had been stolen. And deep down, he knew that the fire had not destroyed the bond. It had only sealed it tighter. That night, as he lay in bed, he heard it again. The slow, steady rhythm of drums, carried faintly through the night air. His parents slept soundly, unaware, but the boy's eyes stayed wide open. For he knew now that the chief's knock had not been the end of a story, but the beginning. And the forest, vast and ancient, was not finished with him yet. The rhythm of the drums grew stronger with each passing night. At first faint, like a whisper from the hills, it soon became undeniable, pulsing through the ground as though the very earth carried the beat. The boy lay awake, his heart matching its tempo, torn between fear and fascination. He wondered if his family could hear it too, but when he asked at breakfast, his parents only looked at him with worry. To them, the world was quiet. To him, it was alive with an ancient call he could not escape. One afternoon, while working in the fields, the boy saw a hawk circling above, its cry sharp and piercing. It swooped low, dropping a feather at his feet before vanishing into the sky. He bent down to pick it up, and in that moment, he felt something stir within him, a strange sense of being seen, chosen, marked. He hid the feather inside his shirt, knowing his father would not approve, but unable to let it go. The forest, the girl, the chief, the drums, all of it seemed to weave around him, pulling him into a story that no one else could see. That evening, as the sun melted into the horizon, the native girl appeared once more. This time she was closer, her face half lit by the fading light. She told him the chief had spoken of balance, of how one act of kindness could shift the course of many lives. She warned him that choices would soon fall upon him, choices that would demand courage far greater than the night he led her through the forest. Her voice trembled as she said the words, as though she, too, feared what was coming. When she disappeared back into the trees, the boy stood frozen, the feather clutched tight against his chest. He wanted to believe her words were no more than stories, but deep inside, he knew they carried truth. The West had always been a place of fragile lines, between peace and war, trust and betrayal, survival and ruin. Now, somehow he had been placed on that line, his every step watched by eyes far older than his own. That night, he dreamed again. This time he saw the chief, standing in the middle of a burning plain, his hand outstretched, calling the boy to his side. Behind him, shadows moved, men, spirits, perhaps both, while the native girl's voice echoed in the wind. Balance must be kept. He woke, gasping for breath, the drums still alive in his chest, the feather warm in his hand as though it carried fire. The town could feel it too, even if they pretended otherwise. The air grew heavier, the nights longer, and the silence between neighbors more strained. Men patrolled the streets with rifles slung over their shoulders, their nerves sharp as glass. Women avoided the forest, refusing even to gather firewood, as though its edge had become a boundary no settler dared cross. The boy's family tried to cling to routine, but routine crumbled under the weight of fear. Every knock at the door made them flinch. Every shadow at dusk set their hearts racing. The boy, however, felt caught between two worlds. At home, he saw fear tighten his father's jaw and sorrow cloud his mother's prayers. In the forest, he felt a strange pull, as if the land itself whispered to him, urging him not to turn away. He was too young to carry such burdens, yet too deeply bound to escape them. What had begun as a single act of kindness now felt like a destiny pressing down on him, shaping his path whether he wished it or not. One evening, as the family sat in uneasy silence, a new sound broke through the air. It was not the heavy knock of the chief, but the distant cry of voices rising together, chants that rolled across the land like thunder. The boy's father stood, his face pale, his hand gripping the rifle that leaned against the wall. The mother clutched the boy close, whispering prayers as the chants grew louder, closer, heavier. The boy, though trembling, felt no fear in the sound, only a strange familiarity, as if the forest was calling his name again. The next morning, smoke curled in the distance, rising from beyond the tree line. The town erupted in panic, men mounting horses, women crying out for their children. Rumors spread like fire itself, that the natives were gathering, that the chief had brought his warriors, that retribution was at hand. The boy's father forbade him from leaving the house, but the boy could not silence the drum in his chest. He knew this was no simple gathering of war. It was something older, something tied to the word the girl had spoken, balance. That night, as the boy lay awake listening to the chants echo faintly through the dark, he realized that no matter what the town believed, his path was already set. He was no longer just a child living at the edge of the frontier. He was the bridge, the thread that tied two worlds together. And soon, he would be asked to choose which part of himself to give away, to his people, to the chief, or to the forest that had marked him as its own. By the time autumn arrived, the boy's life had become a quiet storm. Each day, the town tightened its grip on fear. Men drilled with rifles at dawn, women stockpiled food, and children were warned never to wander near the forest. Yet despite their vigilance, unease seeped into every corner of their lives, like smoke that could not be contained. The boy, meanwhile, felt the weight of two worlds pressing harder with each passing day. He no longer dreamed of games or chores, but of drums, shadows, and the chief's eyes watching him from across an invisible divide. One evening, as the leaves fell in brittle whispers across the plains, the chief appeared once more. He came alone, just as before, and knocked on the family's door with the same deliberate weight. When the boy's father opened it, his rifle already in hand, the chief simply raised a palm. Neither threat nor plea, but a gesture that silenced the air. His gaze turned toward the boy, and though no words passed between them, something in that look spoke volumes. The time of waiting was ending. The boy stepped outside before his father could stop him. The night was cool, the stars sharp against the sky, and the chief's presence filled the space like a mountain in the dark. He placed a feather, larger than the one the boy already kept, into the boy's hand. Its quill shimmered faintly, as if it carried the glow of moonlight. The chief's voice was steady when he finally spoke. "You carry more than kindness. You carry balance. Do not let it break." Then he turned and vanished into the forest without another word, leaving the boy's father shouting after him, furious and afraid. Inside the house, the family erupted. The father raged, declaring the boy had been marked by curses, demanding they flee the town altogether. The mother wept quietly, torn between fear for her child's safety and awe at what she, too, could not deny, that something greater than themselves had reached into their lives. The boy said nothing. He clutched the feather close, feeling its pulse against his palm like a living thing, and knew he could not run. Whatever destiny the forest carried, it had chosen him, and he could no more escape it than escape his own shadow. That night, as the wind rattled the shutters, the boy dreamt once more. He stood between two fires, one burning with the faces of settlers, the other glowing with the shadows of the natives. Both flames reached for him, pulling, tearing, demanding he choose. But as he reached out his hands, he saw the feathers he carried ignite, binding the fires together into a single blaze that roared high enough to touch the stars. He woke trembling, drenched in sweat, yet certain of one truth. His choice would not be between one side or the other. His choice would be to hold both, no matter the cost. The boy's dreams began to spill into waking life. He would catch glimpses of movement in the corner of his eyes, shapes that dissolved when he turned, whispers that faded when he strained to listen. Once, while gathering water from the well, he saw the reflection of the native girl standing beside him, though when he turned, no one was there. He did not fear these visions. Instead, they filled him with a strange sense of purpose, as though the forest itself was preparing him for what lay ahead. Meanwhile, the town's fear hardened into resolve. The settlers built barricades at the edge of their land, cutting down trees to form walls, their axes biting into the very forest that had become the heart of the boy's secret bond. The sound of chopping echoed like thunder, and with each tree that fell, the boy felt a deeper ache inside his chest. He remembered the chief's words, "Balance must be kept," and knew the settlers were pushing against something they could not comprehend. One evening, smoke rose once more from beyond the tree line. This time it was closer, thicker, and the town erupted in panic. Men readied their rifles, lining the barricades, while women huddled children inside. The boy stood among them, clutching the feather, his heart torn between the family that raised him and the call that now thrummed through his very blood. He could feel eyes watching from the forest, waiting, measuring. He was not just a boy caught between two sides anymore. He was the hinge on which both worlds turned. As darkness fell, a lone figure stepped from the trees. It was not an army, not a war party, but the chief himself, walking with deliberate calm, his staff in hand, his gaze steady. The settlers raised their rifles, but the boy shouted for them to wait. Something in his voice, fierce and trembling, made even the hardened men hesitate. The chief stopped at the barricade, his eyes never leaving the boys, as if all the rifles, all the settlers, all the fear meant nothing. The world had shrunk to just the two of them. And in that silence, thick and unyielding, the boy understood. The next choice would not be his alone. It would be witnessed by every soul in the town and every shadow in the forest. What he said, what he did, in that moment would either mend the fragile thread of peace or tear it apart forever. The silence at the barricade stretched so long it seemed the earth itself held its breath. The settlers, tense and trembling, waited with fingers hovering over triggers. The boy's father stood beside him, his rifle steady but his jaw clenched in fury. And across the wooden wall of logs, the chief remained calm, his presence a force that seemed larger than life. His eyes never wavered from the boy, as though all the town, all the forest, all of history itself had narrowed into that single connection. Then the chief raised his staff and drove it gently into the ground. The sound was not loud, yet it carried across the field like thunder. The boy felt the vibration through his feet, through his bones, and suddenly the rhythm of the drums returned, not from afar, but from within himself. The chief spoke only one sentence, his voice deep and unshaken. The boy must choose. His words ignited chaos. Men shouted, women screamed, rifles were raised. But the boy, frozen in place, understood that the choice was not about sides, not about loyalty to one people or the other. It was about balance, the fire that united rather than the fire that destroyed. The boy's father grabbed his shoulder, urging him back, but the boy shook free. With the feather clutched tightly in his hand, he stepped forward, climbing over the barricade before anyone could stop him. Gasps rang out as settlers shouted for him to return, and rifles were leveled at the chief. Yet the boy moved calmly, his heart pounding not in fear, but in a strange certainty that this was the path written for him the night he had led the girl through the forest. He stood before the chief, the feather raised high. In that moment, the wind shifted, carrying the smoke from the forest into the town, blending the scents of pine and fire with the dust of the plains. It was as if the land itself bent forward to listen. The boy's voice broke the silence, trembling but clear. "I will not choose between my people and yours. I choose both." The words struck like lightning, splitting the air with their daring simplicity. The chief's stern face softened, almost imperceptibly. He reached out, touching the feather in the boy's hand, and nodded once. Behind him, shadows stirred in the forest, but no warriors emerged. Instead, the night held still, waiting, as though the world itself had paused to see if a child's courage could carry the weight of peace. The settlers stood stunned, their rifles lowered but their fear unbroken. Some shouted that the boy was betraying them, others begged him to come back, their voices torn between anger and desperation. But none dared fire, for the chief's presence loomed too strong, and the boy's defiance had planted doubt in every heart. The boy's father stepped forward, fury blazing in his eyes. Yet even he could not bring himself to drag his son away. Something in the air was greater than all of them, a force that could not be undone by brute strength. The chief spoke again, his words low and measured, carrying across the barricade like a vow. A single act of kindness can shape generations. This boy has shown what many men have forgotten. His gaze swept over the settlers, piercing their fear, then returned to the boy. Balance will remain, if he remembers what he has begun. With that, he turned and walked back into the forest, his figure swallowed by the trees, leaving behind silence so deep it roared louder than any war cry. The settlers did not cheer, nor did they relax. Instead, they looked upon the boy with a mixture of awe and suspicion. Some saw him as a bridge, others as a traitor, but none could deny that he had altered the course of their lives. The boy himself felt no triumph, only the weight of what had passed into his hands. He knew that peace was fragile, that hatred would not vanish overnight. But he also knew that he had carried the feather, the fire, the choice, and for now, it had been enough. As the town returned to its uneasy routines, the boy often found himself staring at the forest, listening for the drums that still echoed faintly within his chest. He wondered if the girl watched him from the shadows, if the chief's eyes still measured his steps, if the land itself waited for him to falter or to rise. Whatever the answer, he understood one truth that the West had carved into him, that even a child could carry the burden of balance when men failed to do so. And so his story spread, not as a tale of war or conquest, but as a legend of choice. The boy who helped a lost native girl in the forest, and the chief who knocked on his door alone. A story of kindness that defied fear, of balance that endured against the odds, and a moment when the Wild West remembered that sometimes the smallest hands carried the heaviest weight. In the end, what began as a simple act of kindness, a boy guiding a lost girl through the forest, became a story that altered the course of two worlds. It was not the rifles at the barricade, nor the chants that rolled like thunder, that determined the future that night. It was the courage of one child who chose compassion over fear, balance over division. The West often glorified battles and victories, yet here was a tale that whispered a different truth. Sometimes, the greatest strength lies not in the hand that draws a weapon, but in the heart that dares to see beyond walls. The chief's words remained etched in memory, reminding all who heard them that peace is fragile, born from choices made in moments of doubt. His presence alone carried centuries of history, yet he bowed to the bravery of a boy who refused to let hatred define him. That image, the chief retreating into the forest, leaving silence instead of war, was proof that even in a land where blood often stained the soil, there could be another way forward. The boy had not ended conflict forever, but he had planted something far more enduring, the seed of possibility. For the settlers, the lesson was heavy, uncomfortable, but unforgettable. They saw that their fear, their mistrust, could have sparked a fire that would consume them all. Instead, they witnessed a child bridge a divide they themselves had widened for years. It left them asking hard questions. How many wars could have been avoided if men remembered what children know instinctively? That every stranger is human first. How many lives could have been spared if kindness had been chosen over suspicion? And for us, hearing this story now, the lesson remains timeless. We live in a world still divided by lines. Lines of culture, of belief, of pride. Yet the West reminds us, through this boy's choice, that those lines can be crossed, not with force, but with courage and empathy. It is a challenge as much as a comfort, to ask ourselves whether we, too, would have the strength to choose both fires, both sides, and become a bridge when others only see walls. If this story moved you, if it stirred reflection or left you with questions that linger even after the fire has dimmed, share your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice continues the legacy of stories like this, reminding us that every tale is a lesson waiting to be heard. And if you want to walk further through the legends and hidden truths of the Wild West, subscribe and like this video, so you will always find yourself at the fire where these stories live on.